the massive Galactic Council Station rotated slowly in the darkness of space, its crystalline spires catching the light of 3 distant suns. Inside the Grand Chamber, the air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as representatives from over 1,000 species gathered for what many considered a routine session. Ambassador Han Mingi adjusted her simple black uniform and checked her translation device one final time. The neural interface hummed against her temple, ready to convert her words into the clicking, buzzing, and whistling languages of the assembled aliens. At 32, she was the youngest human ambassador in history, though that distinction meant little in a galaxy where humans ranked somewhere below the insects in social standing. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a massive, spherical room with floating platforms arranged in concentric circles. Each platform held delegates from different worlds, their bizarre forms creating a living museum of galactic evolution. The Vorthok delegation occupied the highest tier, their crystalline bodies refracting the blue chamber lights into rainbow patterns. Below them, the slug-like hegemony representatives oozed across their platforms, leaving trails of luminescent slime. The insectoid Zephyrians clicked their mandibles in what passed for conversation among their kind. "Honored Council," Mingi began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber through thousands of speakers, "stand before you today, not as a supplicant, but as a representative of 67 human worlds. Our people have served the galaxy faithfully for 3 decades, extracting resources from hostile environments, building your cities, manning your factories." The Vorthok Prime Minister, a creature that looked like a walking diamond formation, interrupted with a sound like breaking glass. "Human speaks of service. We speak of obligation. Your species was uplifted from primitive spaceflight to galactic civilization. You owe us your very existence among the stars." Minji felt her jaw clench but kept her expression neutral. "We are grateful for the opportunity to join galactic society. However, the current labor quotas are unsustainable. Human workers are dying at rates that would appall any civilized species. We request a reduction in mining quotas and improved safety protocols." The chamber erupted in what could generously be called laughter. The hegemony delegate made a wet gurgling sound, while the Zephyrians' chittering rose to a painful pitch. Even the peaceful Altarians, who resembled tall, thin birds, ruffled their feathers dismissively. "Emotional mammals, the Vorthok Prime," Minister continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been challenged. "Your species excels at manual labor because you possess the primitive aggression necessary for dangerous work. Do not presume to negotiate with your evolutionary superiors." From the observation deck above, Captain Kim Doyon watched the proceedings with growing anger. His weathered face bore the scars of 20 years working in the void, hauling cargo between human colonies and alien worlds. The Morning Star sat in the docking bay below, its holds filled with rare trilithium crystals that had cost 7 human lives to extract from the radioactive mines of Kepler 4-4 to be. "They really don't get it, do they?" whispered Lieutenant Park. Soyoung, her young face hard with suppressed fury. At 24, she'd already seen more death and suffering than most species experienced in their entire lifespans. Her brother had died in the Proxima Centauri mining accident, along with 300 other human workers. The alien overseers had called it acceptable losses. Doyon's knuckles were white as he gripped the railing. "They think we're domesticated, like we've forgotten what we are." He watched as Mingi bowed respectfully to the council's dismissal of her proposal. Maybe it's time they learned the difference between choosing to be peaceful and being incapable of violence. The Morning Star was more than it appeared. Hidden beneath its cargo, manifest were compartments filled with weapons and communication equipment that the galaxy's superior species had never bothered to detect. After all, what threat could primitive humans pose? Far below in the mining colonies of the Outer Rim, the reality of human existence played out in scenes of grinding misery. On Kepler 4-4, to be, the air itself was poison. The radiation levels would kill most alien species within hours. But humans could survive long enough to extract the precious minerals that powered galactic civilization. Li Ta-yong wiped the sweat from his brow. The motion automatic after 8 years of this work. The mining exosuit was old and patched. barely adequate protection against the hostile environment. Around him, dozens of other human workers operated the massive extraction equipment. Their movements coordinated by years of experience. The Zephyrian overseers watched from their climate-controlled observation posts, occasionally crackling their energy whips to drive the workers deeper into the toxic caverns. The aliens' insectoid forms were perfectly adapted for their desert homeworld, but they couldn't survive 10 minutes in the conditions they forced humans to endure. Faster, mammals, chittered Overseer Clickstack, his compound eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. Quota must be met, or rations will be reduced again. Taeyong's younger brother Minho had collapsed from exhaustion the day before. The 20-year-old had been working double shifts to support their sick mother back on New Seoul. When he'd finally fallen unconscious at his workstation, the alien medics had declared him temporarily unfit for labor and denied him treatment. "Another day in paradise," Taeyong muttered, his voice lost in the grinding of machinery. But his words carried a bitter edge that the aliens didn't recognize. They heard only submission, not the carefully controlled anger of a species that had learned to hide its true nature. The galaxy had grown comfortable with human submission. He saw the bowed heads, the respectful responses, the willingness to take on the jobs that would kill other species. What they didn't see was the network of hidden communications, the weapons caches, the carefully maintained military training that every human received for mining safety. Every human carried within them the genetic memory of a species that had clawed its way to the top of their homeworld's food chain. They were the descendants of apex predators who had conquered a planet full of creatures designed to kill them. But they had chosen to bury that nature, to be better than their instincts demanded. The aliens had mistaken that choice for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The morning sky over knew. Henyang was painted in shades of amber and gold when the Zephyrian warships appeared. Shinjuan was feeding her 6-month-old daughter Yuna when the first transport vessels descended like metallic vultures, their engines drowning out the peaceful sounds of farm life that had defined this world for 3 generations. "Get inside," shouted her husband Cho Ji-hoon from the rice fields, but it was already too late. The Zephyrian soldiers were everywhere, their insectoid forms moving with mechanical precision as they herded human families toward the waiting ships. The lead soldier, his carapace gleaming with battle honors, spoke through a translator device. That made his clicks and chirps into cold, emotionless words. By order of the Zephyrian Empire, this world is now designated as Agricultural Resource Zone 7 Alpha. All mammals will be relocated to appropriate labor facilities. Giwan clutched Yuna closer as the alien soldier's compound eyes fixed on them. The creature's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Do not resist. Compliance ensures survival. Around them, the other families were being loaded onto the transport ships with brutal efficiency. Old Bei Hunwoo, whose family had been among the first settlers on New Hanyang, walked slowly toward the ships, his weathered hands shaking with rage rather than fear. "Where are they taking us?" Ji-hoon whispered, his voice barely audible over the crying children and the hum of alien machinery. "Labor camps," Hyunwoo replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen this pattern before. "Same as what happened to the colonists on Kepler 186F. Same as New Busan. Same as everywhere else they want something from." The old farmer's eyes met Guan's, and she saw something there that chilled her. Not despair, but a cold calculation. That reminded her of the stories her grandfather used to tell about the old wars on Earth. "They think we're broken," he whispered. "They think we've forgotten who we are." The transport ship's cargo hold was designed for livestock, not people. Hundreds of humans were packed into spaces meant for half that number, with barely enough room to sit. The air recyclers wheezed and struggled to keep up with the demand. Filling the space with the metallic taste of failing machinery, Ji-hoon held his wife and daughter close as the ship lifted off, taking them away from the only home they'd ever known. Through the small porthole, he could see other ships rising from the surface, each one filled with his neighbors, his friends, his community. Below them, Zephyrian machinery was already moving into the abandoned farms, ready to strip the world of everything valuable. "Dad, what's happening?" asked a young boy from across the hold, his eyes wide with fear. "We're being relocated," replied his father, the words careful and measured. But Jiwon noticed the man's hand moving to his pocket, where she glimpsed the edge of what looked like a small communication device. "Don't worry, son. Someone's keeping track of where we go." Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on dozens of human worlds. The Zephyrian Empire had grown bold, taking not just resources, but entire populations. They justified it as strategic resource acquisition, but everyone knew the truth. They were testing how far they could push before humanity broke completely. Captain Kim Do-yeon stood on the bridge of the Morning Star, watching the stream of distress signals flooding his communication arrays. 17 different human worlds had sent emergency broadcasts in just the past week, each one cut short as Zephyrian forces landed and seized control. "Sir," reported his communications officer, Lieutenant Park So-yang, "we're getting reports of mass deportations from the Centauri sector, entire families being shipped to the mining worlds in the Outer Rim." Do-yeon's jaw tightened as he studied the tactical displays. Each red dot represented a human world under attack. Each blue dot, a refugee convoy being herded toward the slave camps that the galaxy politely called labor facilities. His ship's sensors, far more advanced than any alien suspected, tracked the movement of every Zephyrian vessel. "Admiral," he spoke into his encrypted transmitter, knowing his words would travel through quantum channels to a hidden base that officially didn't exist. "Operation Sleeping Giant needs to accelerate. They're not just taking our worlds anymore, they're taking our people." Deep beneath the surface of Luna, in a command center that had been carved from solid rock over 30 years of secret construction, Admiral Yoon Chae-won studied the holographic displays that showed humans suffering across the galaxy. The images were stark and terrible, families torn apart, children crying for parents who had been selected for hazardous duty assignments, elderly people who couldn't keep up with the forced marches simply left behind. At 38, Chae-won was the youngest fleet commander in human history, though the galaxy believed humans had no fleet at all. Her short black hair was streaked with premature gray from years of carrying the weight of humanity's secret preparations. Around her, dozens of officers monitored communications from across human space, their faces grim as they documented each new atrocity. "Admiral," reported Commander Jung Ho-seok, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "the Zephyrians have established processing centers on 12 worlds. They're sorting humans by age and physical capability. Let the strong ones go to the deep. Mine's the technical specialists of the factory worlds." "And the others?" Schwan asked, though she already knew the answer. "Disposal facilities," Ho-seok replied. The words heavy with implications that made everyone in the command center pause. Chae-won closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every human life that hung in the balance. When she opened them, her expression was carved from stone. "Patience, Captain," she replied to Do-yeon's transmission. "Let them think they're winning. Every atrocity they commit makes our response more justified." The room fell silent except for the hum of advanced computers and the distant vibration of massive machinery. Hidden throughout the lunar facility, weapons that could crack planets were being loaded and prepared. Ships that had been disguised as cargo haulers for decades were being fitted with their true armaments. Soldiers who had pretended to be miners and farmers were receiving their final briefings. "Ma'am," asked Lieutenant Colonel Kim Nam-jun, the facility's strategic planning officer, "are we really going to let them continue this?" Chae-won looked at the tactical displays, showing human worlds under occupation. Human families being torn apart, human children being sorted like cargo. "We're going to let them commit every crime they want to commit," she said quietly. "Then, we're going to make them pay for all of it at once." Meanwhile, in the luxurious command center of the Zephyrian flagship Dominion, Commander the Kalan reviewed the latest reports from human space with deep satisfaction. His compound eyes reflected the glow of holographic displays showing successful occupation after successful occupation. "Excellent progress," he clicked to his subordinates. "The mammals are broken, scattered, leaderless. Their pathetic ambassador has stopped making her emotional appeals to the council. Their merchant vessels have decreased their routes by 70%. Everything suggests complete submission." His intelligence officer, a younger Zephyrian with battle scars across his carapace, chirped uncertainly. Sir, our analysis suggests the humans are withdrawing to defensive positions around their core worlds. Could this indicate preparation for resistance? The Kalan's mandibles spread in what passed for laughter among his species. Defensive positions, or cowering in fear, as is appropriate for an inferior species. Soon we'll have them all in proper facilities where they can serve their betters productively. The commander had no way of knowing that every human merchant ship was actually a military vessel in disguise. Equipped with weapons technology that made Zephyrian battleships look like children's toys, he couldn't detect the quantum communication networks that connected every human world, or the massive industrial complexes hidden in asteroid belts that had been producing weapons for 3 decades. Most importantly, he had no understanding of human psychology. He saw their withdrawal as submission, when in reality, it was the same tactical retreat that had allowed humans to survive ice ages, plagues, and global wars.
Ow.
They were gathering their strength, positioning their pieces, and preparing for something the galaxy had never seen before. The sleeping giant was about to wake up. The galaxy would never be the same. The morning of March 15th started like any other day on New Eden. Colonel Park Jimin stood in front of his classroom, pointing to an old holographic display showing Earth's blue marble suspended in the darkness of space. 28 children, aged between 8 and 12, listened with rapt attention as he told them stories of humanity's homeworld. And that's where we all came from, he said, his voice warm with the pride of a teacher who genuinely loved his work. A little blue planet where our ancestors learned to dream of the stars. 8-year-old Lee Su-Mine raised her hand eagerly. Colonel Park, did people on Earth really have to fight dinosaurs? Jimin chuckled, about to answer when the classroom's emergency alert system began blaring. Red lights flashed across the walls, and the automated voice spoke in calm, measured tones. Unidentified vessels approaching. All civilians report to designated shelters immediately. Through the classroom's large windows, Jimin could see them. Massive Zephyrian warships descending through New Eden's atmosphere like metallic storm clouds. Their hulls were scarred with battle marks. Weapon ports glowed with an ominous blue light that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Children, quickly, Jimin shouted, his military training kicking in instantly. Emergency positions, just like we practiced. But there was nowhere to run. The school had been built in the center of New Eden's capital, surrounded by open courtyards. In playing fields, the Zephyrian targeting computers had identified it as a priority target, not for its military value, but for its psychological impact. They wanted to send a message that would break human resistance forever. Young Su-Min looked up at her teacher with wide, frightened eyes. Colonel, are we going to be okay? Jimin knelt down, pulling the children close around him. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be fine. The lie came easily, born from a lifetime of protecting innocence. Through the windows, he could see the weapon arrays on the nearest warship rotating toward their building. The energy beam struck without warning, turning the reinforced concrete and steel into superheated plasma in milliseconds. The school, which had stood for 15 years as a symbol of human hope on New Eden, simply ceased to exist. 300 children and their teachers died in the first volley, their dreams and laughter silenced forever. Dr. Nam Su-Yang was in the middle of treating a patient when the second wave of attacks hit the medical center. The 40-year-old physician had dedicated her life to healing, establishing New Eden's first trauma center after seeing too many preventable deaths in the outer colonies. She was suturing a wound on a construction worker when the building shook. Violently? What's happening? Asked the patient, wincing as another explosion rocked the structure. Stay calm, Su-Yang replied, though her own hands were trembling. Through the medical center's reinforced windows, she could see the Zephyrian attack craft systematically destroying every structure in the city. Hospitals, schools, homes, nothing was spared. A wounded child was brought in, carried by her terrified mother. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her leg crushed by falling debris. As Su-Yang worked to stabilize the child, she heard the whine of charging weapons directly above them. Everyone down, she screamed, throwing herself over the wounded girl, just as the ceiling exploded inward. The medical center collapsed in a cascade of twisted metal and burning debris. Soyang's last conscious thought was whether the child beneath her was still breathing, 5 kilometers away. Farmer Jang Hook Jai stood in his wheat fields, watching his world die. At 52, he had spent 20 years turning New Eden's rocky soil into productive farmland. His hands were permanently stained with earth, and his back ached from decades of honest labor. But none of that mattered now. The Zephyrian warships moved across the landscape like massive insects, their energy weapons systematically destroying everything humans had built. Houses exploded into flame. Gardens that had taken years to grow were reduced to smoking craters. The community center, where he had met his wife Kim Ariam 15 years ago, was nothing but glowing rubble. "Ariam," he whispered, his voice lost in the sound of destruction. She had gone to visit her sister in the capital that morning, planning to surprise their 10-year-old nephew with a birthday gift. The capital, where columns of smoke now rose into the sky like funeral pyres. His communication device crackled to life, emergency broadcasts from other human worlds, all carrying the same message. New Eden is under attack. No survivors expected. Repeat, no survivors expected. Hookjai fell to his knees in the dirt that had been his life's work, understanding that he would never see his wife again. The Zephyrians weren't just taking their world, they were erasing every trace that humans had ever existed here. The images reached Luna within hours, transmitted by hidden surveillance satellites that the aliens had never detected. Admiral Yun Chaiwan stood in the command center, her fists clenched as she watched footage of burning human settlements. The tactical displays showed the complete destruction of New Eden's infrastructure, 50,000 civilians dead in less than 6 hours. Around her, officers who had maintained perfect military discipline for decades struggled to contain their rage. Commander Oseo Kajin, normally unflappable, was gripping his control console so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "Ma'am," he said, his voice hoarse with barely controlled emotion. "The fleet is asking for permission to launch immediate retaliation. We can have a full battle group at New Eden within 18 hours. "Not yet," Chawan whispered, tears streaming down her face as she watched the systematic murder of innocents. One more try. One last chance. Knew that once humanity revealed its true strength, there would be no going back. The galaxy would never again see them as harmless laborers and farmers. But watching the children of New Eden die, she wondered if their patience had already cost too much. Ambassador. Han Mingi stood before the Galactic Council for what she knew would be the final time. Her diplomatic uniform was wrinkled from sleepless nights, her eyes red from crying over the reports that kept flooding in from human space. The assembled aliens chittered and buzzed with barely concealed amusement at her obvious distress. "Honored Council," she began, her voice carrying across the vast chamber. 50,000 civilians died on New Eden. Children attending school, doctors treating patients, farmers tending their crops. Innocent people who wanted nothing more than to live in peace. The Vorthok representative, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into cold rainbows, made the sound that his species used for dismissive laughter. "Acceptable losses in the pacification of a troublesome world," he clicked. "Your species will learn its place through discipline." "Discipline?" Minji's voice cracked. "You murdered children in their classrooms. You bombed hospitals. You turned a peaceful farming world into a graveyard." "We established order," interrupted Warlord Grexel, the Zephyrian representative. His massive form dominated his floating throne, battle scars crisscrossing his carapace like a map of conquered worlds. Inferior species must be reminded of their position in the natural hierarchy. Minji closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what was about to happen. When she opened them, her expression had changed completely. The pleading was gone. The diplomatic courtesy that had defined her career was stripped away. Its place was something that made several alien delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We tried to warn you," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made the chamber's translation. "Systems struggle to find equivalent concepts in alien languages. We tried to be better than our nature, offered you our partnership, our friendship, our service. But you chose to see us as animals to be broken." She straightened her shoulders, and for the first time, the assembled aliens saw something in her posture that reminded them of predators from their own homeworlds. "You've made your choice, now we'll make ours." The council erupted in derisive laughter, the sound echoing off the chamber's crystalline walls. Warlord Grextel leaned forward in his floating throne, his compound eyes gleaming with cruel amusement. "Empty. Threats from an inferior species," he hissed, his mandibles clicking in what passed for laughter among his kind. "What will you do? Cry at us more? File another useless diplomatic protest?" Ambassador Mingy smiled, a cold, terrible expression that the galaxy had never seen on a human face before. It was the smile of a predator that had been hiding among prey for too long. The expression of a species that had conquered a hostile world through sheer determination and controlled violence. "We're going to remind you why we're called the Children of Terra," she said, her voice carrying promise of something that made even the most arrogant alien delegates pause. "And then you're going to learn what happens when you break the one rule that every species in the galaxy should have remembered." "And what rule is that?" sneered Grextel. Mingy turned and walked toward the chamber's exit, her footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. At the doorway, she paused and looked back at the assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds.
"I'll never
harm our children," she said simply, and walked out of the chamber forever. The transformation began exactly 12 hours after Ambassador Mingy walked out of the Galactic Council chambers. Across the galaxy and star systems where humans had labored quietly for decades, the greatest deception in galactic history was finally revealed. On the cargo vessel Star Trader, Captain Kim Do-yeon stood before his crew in the ship's main hold. For 20 years, they had hauled minerals and supplies between human colonies, enduring the contempt of alien customs officers and the dismissive treatment of port authorities. Now, everything would change. "Initiate Phoenix Protocol," Do-yeon announced, his voice carrying through the ship's communication systems. The cargo hold's floor began to retract with a mechanical hum that had been hidden beneath the normal sounds of the ship's operations. Beneath the false deck, weapon arrays emerged like deadly flowers blooming in the darkness. Particle beam cannons that could punch through a battleship's armor, quantum torpedoes that could crack a moon, shield generators that had been disguised as standard cargo containers. Lieutenant Park Soyoung watched in amazement as the ship she had served on for 5 years revealed its true nature. "Sir, the weapon systems are coming online. All stations report ready for combat operations in the fleet," Do-yeon asked, though he already knew the answer. 247 vessels have confirmed Phoenix activation," she reported. "The Merchant Marine is now the human defense fleet." Similar scenes played out across human space. Mining platforms that had operated for decades suddenly revealed themselves as military installations. The massive processors were actually weapon manufacturing facilities. The primitive human workers shed their coveralls to reveal military uniforms underneath, taking up weapons they had been secretly producing and maintaining for 30 years in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. The largest mining operation in human space began its own transformation. What the galaxy had believed to be a simple extraction facility was actually something far more significant. Admiral Yoon Chae-won stood on the bridge of the Earth's Vengeance, a dreadnought that had been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. The ship was massive, 3 kilometers long and bristling with weapon systems that made alien battleships look like children's toys. Around her, the largest human fleet in history materialized from hyperspace, their stealth systems finally deactivated. "Admiral," reported Commander Jung Ho-seok, "all task forces are in position. Fleet strength, 800 combat vessels, 200 support ships, and 47,000 highly trained personnel." Chae-won looked at the tactical display, showing the positions of every human ship in the galaxy. Wow. After 30 years of careful preparation, of enduring insults and abuse, of watching their people suffer and die, humanity was finally ready to show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. "All ships. This is Admiral Yoon," she broadcast across the fleet. "Today, we stop being the galaxy's victims. Today, we become its teachers." The Zephyrian home system was the first to fall. Captain Lee Kangman led the assault on their primary battle station, his squadron of fighters moving with a precision that stunned the alien defenders. The Zephyrians had never seen combat pilots who could think and react as quickly as humans. Their reflexes honed by millennia of evolution on a world where split-second decisions meant survival. Impossible, screamed Warlord Grexel, as his supposedly impregnable fortress crumbled under human fire. The massive space station had been built to withstand the heaviest weapons in the galaxy. But the humans were using technology that the aliens had never seen before. "Your species is inferior," he shrieked over the communication channels. "Your technology is primitive." Commander Yun Yun's voice cut through the chaos as her ship's weapons tore through his flagship's shields like paper. "Our technology was never primitive, Warlord. We just let you think it was." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human fighters danced between the massive Zephorian battleships, their pilots displaying a level of skill that seemed almost supernatural. The alien vessels, designed for straightforward combat against predictable enemies, couldn't adapt to the humans' fluid tactics. "How are they moving like that?" demanded the Zephyrian fleet commander, watching his forces being systematically destroyed by what should have been an inferior enemy. "They're not following standard combat protocols," his tactical officer replied, his compound eyes wide with disbelief. "They're improvising, adapting, thinking creatively. Our combat computers can't predict their movements." The human ship struck, like a swarm of angry hornets, each one operating independently while still maintaining perfect coordination with the larger fleet. It was a display of tactical flexibility that the rigid alien military structures simply couldn't match. Captain Kangman's fighter screamed through the debris field that had once been the Zephyrian outer defense line, his targeting systems locked. "Onto the command ship's bridge." "This is for New Eden," he whispered, fired. The quantum torpedo punched through the flagship's armor and detonated in the command center. Warlord Grextal had just enough time to realize that his species' reign of terror was ending before the explosion consumed him. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Zephyrian fleet, which had terrorized dozens of worlds and considered itself the most powerful force in the galaxy, was completely annihilated. Not a single human ship was lost. Back on New Eden, Colonel Park Jimin had survived the attack through sheer luck. He had been thrown clear when the school collapsed, buried under debris that had protected him from the follow-up strikes. He stood in the ruins of his classroom, watching Zephyrian prisoners being led away in chains. The aliens who had seemed so mighty and superior, just days before now cowered before human soldiers. Their carapaces were cracked, their compound eyes dim with defeat. They had expected to be executed or tortured, as they would have done to human prisoners. "Sir," said Sergeant Kim Tae-young, saluting crisply, "what are your orders regarding the prisoners?" Jimin looked at the spot where his students had died. Little Sumin had asked him about dinosaurs just moments before the attack. His heart ached with loss, but his training as both a soldier and a teacher guided his response. "Feed them," he said quietly. "Clothe them. Give them medical care. Show them what civilized species do with prisoners." The sergeant looked confused. "Sir, after what they did to the children?" "Especially after what they did to the children," Jimin replied. "We're not them, Sergeant. We're better. That's the point." The message spread across the galaxy faster than light. Humanity had revealed its true nature, and it was terrifying not because of their cruelty, but because of their restraint. Even in their fury, even after suffering decades of abuse and watching their children murdered, they remained honorable. Alien species that had dismissed humans as primitive animals now watched in stunned silence as human forces liberated enslaved. Populations provided medical aid to wounded enemies and treated prisoners with dignity. The galaxy had expected monsters awakening to vengeance. Instead, they found something far more disturbing, a species that could wage war with devastating efficiency while never losing their humanity. The sleeping giant was awake, and it was nothing like what the galaxy had expected. The Galactic Council's emergency session was unlike anything in recorded history. The massive chamber, once filled with the arrogant chittering of 1,000 species, now echoed with panicked whispers and terrified clicking. Ack! Representatives who had ruled the galaxy for millennia huddled in their floating platforms watching. Holographic displays that showed their worlds falling one by one to human forces. Impossible, muttered the hegemony prime minister, his slug-like body oozing stress pheromones across his platform. The humans were broken, scattered. They had no fleet, no weapons, no organization. The reports flooding in told a different story. Human forces were systematically dismantling every empire that had oppressed them, but the details were confusing. They weren't enslaving populations or seizing resources. They weren't establishing military governments or demanding tribute. They were doing something that no conquering species in galactic history had ever done. They were liberating. On the mining world of Altira 7, General Park Jinsu stood before a crowd of freed slaves, his uniform bearing the insignia of something called the Free Worlds Alliance. The insignia showed a simple circle of clasped hands, different species working together as equals. Behind him, human medics moved through the crowd, treating aliens who had been worked nearly to death by their own kind. "You're free," he announced, his words translating through speakers into dozens of languages. "It's free to go home, free to choose your own path, free to live without fear." The liberated aliens stared in confusion. Most of them had never known freedom. They had been born into slavery, passed from owner to owner like property. A young Altarian, his bird-like features marked by malnutrition and abuse, raised a trembling wing. "Free to do what, General?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Whatever you want," Jinsu replied gently. "Go home to your families. Start a business. Learn to read. Explore the stars. The choice is yours." The crowd began to murmur. The concept of choice so foreign that many couldn't comprehend it. They had expected new masters, perhaps kinder ones, but still masters. Instead, they found something unprecedented in galactic history, a conquering species that conquered only to liberate above the Council homeworld. Admiral Yun Chewan's fleet materialized from hyperspace like deadly flowers blooming in the darkness. The ships were magnificent and terrifying sleek vessels that moved with predatory grace, their hulls bristling with weapon systems that made the planet's defenses look like children's toys. "This is Admiral Yun of the Human Defense Fleet," she broadcast on all frequencies. "I'm here to deliver a message from the species you thought you could break." The Council's defense coordinator, a crystalline being whose kind had never known fear, watched his instruments in growing horror. The human ships weren't just technologically superior. They were positioned with tactical precision that suggested planning decades in advance. Every defense satellite, every orbital platform, every escape route was covered. "How many ships?" he whispered to his aide. 800 combat vessels, sir. And they're all targeting our military installations, not civilian centers. They're giving us a chance to surrender, the coordinator realized, its crystalline form flickering with disbelief. Ambassador Han Minji walked into the council chambers for the last time. But everything about her had changed. The diplomatic uniform was gone, replaced by the practical clothing of someone who had work to do. The insignia on her jacket read Supreme Coordinator of the Free Worlds Alliance. And behind her walked representatives of dozens of species, all the ones that had been enslaved, oppressed, or dismissed by the old order. The chamber fell silent as she approached the central podium. This was the same woman who had pleaded for human rights just months before, who had bowed respectfully to their dismissals and insults. Now she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who held the fate of civilizations in her hands. "Ruled through fear," she said, her voice carrying absolute authority across the vast chamber. "You maintained power by convincing yourselves that might made right, but you forgot something important about evolution. The strong don't always win. The smart don't always survive. The ones who adapt do." She gestured to the mixed delegation behind her, beings who had been considered worthless by the old galactic order. "This is adaptation. It's a galaxy where species earn respect through their actions, not their technology or their age. Where freedom isn't something you're granted by your betters, but something you're born with." The Vorthok representative, his crystalline Skin now cracked with stress patterns that spoke of deep terror clicked weakly. What do you want from us? Minji smiled, but this time it wasn't the cold expression that had chilled them before. It was sad, almost pitying. We want what we always wanted, to be left alone, to live in peace, to be treated with dignity. She paused, letting the words sink in. The same things you wanted from us until you got drunk on power and forgot what you were asking for. And if we refuse, croaked the hegemony representative, his voice wet with fear. Then you'll discover what happens when you push a peaceful species too far, Minji replied. But we're hoping you're smarter than that. Captain Kim Do-yan stood on the observation deck of the Morning Star, now revealed as a patrol cruiser. Bristling with advanced sensors and defensive systems, below him, the world that had once been New Hanyang was rebuilding not as a human colony, but as a free world where any species could live and work in dignity. The transformation was remarkable. Zephyrian refugees worked alongside human engineers to rebuild the farms that their own military had destroyed. Altarian artists painted murals celebrating the diversity of species that now called the world home. Children of a dozen different races played together in parks that had been built on the sites of former slave quarters. His daughter Kim Ji-soo joined him, wearing the uniform of the Alliance Medical Corps. At 26, she had already saved hundreds of lives, human and alien alike. Dad, do you think we did the right thing?
Dorian
watched a group of human and alien children racing through the streets below, their laughter carrying up through the ship's open viewport. We tried everything else first, sweetheart. Sometimes the only way to teach a bully is to bloody their nose. But so many died, Jisoo said quietly, thinking of the casualties from the war that had lasted only months but changed everything. And so many more would have died if we'd done nothing, Doyen replied. The galaxy needed to learn that there are consequences for cruelty. Now it has. The galaxy had a new order now. Not human dominance, but human standards, honor, compassion, and the unshakable belief that every sapient being deserved respect. The species that adapted to this new reality thrived. Former slave worlds became centers of trade and learning. Oppressed minorities found protection under Alliance law. The cruel and the corrupt found themselves isolated, their former empires crumbling as their subjects chose freedom over oppression. In the end, humanity had given the galaxy exactly what they'd promised from the beginning they had shown them. What they were truly capable of, the warning had been clear in every diplomatic meeting, every peaceful protest, every respectful request for basic dignity. They had simply chosen not to listen. Ambassador Minji, now Supreme Coordinator Minji, stood in her new office aboard the Alliance headquarters station, looking out at a galaxy that would never again mistake kindness for weakness. Ships from hundreds of worlds moved through the space lanes in peace, their crews working together, regardless of species or origin. On her desk was a simple plaque with words in Korean and a dozen other languages. We didn't want to be your rulers. We wanted to be your equals. You chose violence. We simply chose to be better at it. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had kept its promise. And somewhere in the depths of space, the children of Terra continued their eternal watch. Ready to defend the freedom they had fought so hard to win, the end.